Now, this week, I am delighted to be joined by the Labour MP for Ealing Central and Acton, Dr Rupa Huq, to hear about her work in Parliament and her West London constituency. Rupa, thank you for joining us on the show this morning. So my first question...
Thanks for having me, Dehenna.
Not at all. My first question is a little bit about your overall experience as an MP, because you're elected back in 2015. And I guess we can say it's been a pretty tumultuous period since then, with Brexit raging, with COVID, and now with the war in Ukraine. So my question is, what in your mind has been the sort of highest high of the job since then, and what's been the lowest low?
Do you know, it has been a topsy-turvy time, and in reality, I would only be just ending my first term, I guess, or, just starting the second. I've had three, because we've had an election every other year, 3 times in that period, despite the Fixed Term Parliaments Act. So I think some of the individual highs are helping individual people, to be honest. So I think in my first year, I do a weekly, in fact, it's restarted again. For COVID, it stopped, and then for Omicron, it restarted in September last year, then it stopped for Omicron. So I do an advice surgery 2 hours every Friday. And I remember very early on, someone came in and they were a third-year PhD student from Syria. And because there was an asset freeze, that there were no money allowed to come in and out of Damascus, their third-year fees that they thought were paid by a scholarship to UCL, where they were doing their PhD here, hadn't come, and they were about to be chucked off their course and kicked out of the country. And everything they'd tried was drawing a blank. So I said to UCL, I'm going to raise this on the floor of the House. So it's an amazing honour and privilege, you know this, Dehenna, that you're able to do that. And they weren't listening to her, so I did this, and in business questions, in fact. And then very quickly, UCL relented. They said that they've waived the fees because she had other friends in other universities where they'd done this. So she was able to continue. She was saved from a war zone. So, I mean, that's my first early high, I remember. And there've been bits and pieces like that along the way. Lowest low, probably the 2019 election, when we went down to our lowest number of seats since 1935. Although it brought you in, which is... on balance, nice to have more funky young people around. It looked really serious for the Labour Party, and it looked like we were on the brink of extinction for a minute.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Everyone that we speak to for this segment, always, whenever we ask what the highs are, it's always one of those personal stories and about how you've been able to help an individual. And I think that says so much about the way in which we do this job, doesn't it? I mean, people think it's about the theatricality and what you kind of see in PMQs and in the chamber, but actually, so much of the job isn't like that at all, is it?
Yeah, big time. I mean, the one I did on Friday, I had a sixth form student helping out, and she said, I had no idea you guys do this. It was very humbling to see. And again, we had a wide range of cases. There was someone who'd got out of Ukraine. I'm thinking of raising this one in the House. But they haven't finished their medical degree, so they want to transfer credits, and they were 90% there. There was an Afghanistan case, all sorts, the usual housing repairs. People show you horrendous pictures of their ceiling falling in on their phone or whatever. A lot of it is seriously unglam. People just know PMQs, which is 40 minutes on a Wednesday. That's a tiny chunk of our lives. I mean, I'm off canvassing at 11 in a second. So it's a 7 days a week full-on job, and people just don't know the whole extent of it. They just think lazy fat cats, pay rises, blah, blah, blah. It's not like that.
Oh, yeah, we get that accusation quite a lot. I want to touch on that point about PMQs. I think people seem to think that often it's difficult for MPs of one party or one colour rosette to kind of get along with MPs from other parties. But that's so not the case, is it? There is so much cross-party work that goes on. And I saw your column with Matt Hancock actually recently about how we need more compassion in politics. It was fantastic. And just talk to us about cross-party working, about how important it is.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the Matt Hancock column came out of, I did the closing eulogy in the David Amos tributes. And my last line was, we all need to be a bit more David. We should all be a bit less cross and more cross-party. And, we all want the same thing for our constituents, which is, the best for our local area, that kind of thing. But as you say, people just see the Yarbu oppositional thuggery of PMQs. And behind the scenes, we have a lot of APPGs, all-party parliamentary groups. And you do, especially with a Conservative majority of 80, you do have to work with other parties. I think one of my colleagues who's no longer there said in 2017, she's never going to talk to a Tory. I mean, that's just bonkers. They've been in power for 12 years. You can't get along with not talking to another Tory. So, yeah, a lot of alliances are forged. And Matt Hancock came up to me after that thing and said, that was really good. Let's make something happen out of this. So actually, Dehenna, you could be involved too. I'll talk to you tomorrow about this at length.
Brilliant.
We're doing an edited collection of essays by MPs from different parties about more compassion in politics, more understanding. You know, we're all human beings. But there is, even the very nature of the building, the fact that you're in a face-off with the other side, breeds this oppositional culture. The whole thing of PMQs is to shout down the other lot as loud as you can. And it's just not a sensible way for mature decision-making in a democracy.
No, I completely agree with you. And as for the essay collection, yeah, we'll have a chat, and you may have found a new recruit here, here today.
Good.
I kind of want to talk about your point there about kind of having to work with the government, the Conservative government, because, you know, we are there. But also, how does that contrast with working alongside devolved body in London on things like transport? How do you kind of manage the two?
Yeah, no, good point. Because a lot of times when I ask about transport sort of things, they say, oh, it's all your Labour mayor's fault. I mean, there's different levels of government, and central government funds the Mayor of London, so it's complicated. But look, I would say that throughout both COVID and the Ukraine crisis, there's been unanimity on a lot of stuff. And again, I get Labour Party members saying, when are the gloves going to come off? When are you going to start attacking them more? But for a moment of national crisis, like a war on mainland Europe, you know, it's not the time for party politics and bickering. And, you know, people want to see their government succeed in a pandemic as well. So, you know, there's a time and a place for everything. But you're right about the devolved bodies. We see it as well with the SNP, don't we? That I think we're both united in this one, Dehenna, as unionist parties. We think we're stronger together. Yeah, I mean, yeah, as a London MP, it does feel extremely frustrating that if you ask any question, a minister will say, oh, it's all Sadiq Khan's fault. Whereas actually, you know, things like London Transport, to be fair, there used to always be a central government grant for that. And then it stopped in 2016 under George Osborne. And I do feel that's a little bit mean because we've got a Labour mayor now. I think, you know, we need sustainable long-term solutions. It shouldn't just be election to election, oh, who's in power now, let's be a bit nasty and cut the funding. I mean, London Transport is surviving, but it seems that we have these very hand-to-mouth settlements. There's always an 11th hour sort of negotiation, and then the buses do continue to run. But I mean, again, their fares have been down massively. They're very fare reliant because they don't have a huge central government grant. And with COVID, people haven't been travelling. So, yeah, it's complicated, as Facebook would say.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about some of your actual campaigns that you've run. There's one that really sort of grasped my imagination that I know you and I discussed, and that was around banning protest outside abortion clinics. And you had a private members bill on that. Tell us about how that went.
Yeah, actually, that's another proud moment as well, because we had a massive majority. I think you were on side as well, Dehenna. Most people were. I think only 30 people, we do have 650 MPs, voted against it. So this is nothing to do with abortion and the number of weeks and that, but it is legal in this country, has been since 1968. So women who want to avail themselves of abortion clinics find that they're not able to get in the door of these buildings. And it's an unusual one because in this country, it's done in standalone clinics a lot. I think in Scotland, the SNP, I couldn't get on board with this campaign because they said it's in hospitals, it's entirely separate. It's not, people don't get targeted in the same way. So what you have in England and Wales is standalone abortion clinics. And so women using those services, it's very clear what they're there for. So they face a barrage of protesters. At the moment, I think in the run-up to Lent, there's a group called 40 Days for Life that are doing a 40-day running protest at dozens of clinics around the country. Yeah, and the whole idea of that is just to shame women about their personal choices. It's legal. They should be allowed to access healthcare in anonymity like you would with anything else, with any other operation. So, what has happened actually in my local authority in Ealing is that they made, because there'd been a 25-year protest, it had been going on for ages at the clinic we have. So they'd made a bylaw, local authority bylaw, where there's a 150-metre radius around the clinic. So you can protest at the edges of it, but just not at the clinic gates. And again, there's more appropriate places to do this protest, maybe at the House of Commons or at the council chamber or wherever, because it's legislators who can change this, but not the women who may have had to have it for all sorts of reasons. They could have been raped or had fatal fetal abnormality or all sorts of horrible stuff. But this sort of judgment, this judgy thing with the anti-abortion campaign is, just really intimidating. And every woman should be able to use public spaces free from harassment and intimidation. So actually, Priti Patel was pretty keen on this, and I'm due a meeting with her to discuss it further. And again, that's one I worked with Bernard Jenkin on. We had an amendment we co-sponsored. So,
we'll have to get you back on to talk about it in more detail, Rupa, when we've got a little bit more time.
Yeah, let's do it. And I won't have got out of bed. I'll be in the studio. We'll do it properly next time.
Absolutely. Well, Rupa, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and I'd like to welcome you on the channel again very soon.